So yeah, we had a few prayer requests, and we'll pray for those. And if there's any other prayer requests, we'll do those as well. Okay, yeah, just make sure. You looked like you were getting ready to say something, so I wanted to make sure. No, it's fine. All right, well, let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll start. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to meet here. Lord, I pray that you would add your blessing to the word tonight, Lord, as we study and try to draw nearer to you through your word. Father, everything we do, it is to worship you and to glorify you. And if we could just know you better, it would be better for us to be able to worship you, Lord. And I pray that you would help us with these things. Father, we lift up little Waylon today, Lord, get under control, and that you would go ahead and heal his body, Lord, that you would be with him and comfort him and just work this out so that the doctors know what's going on. Lord, we have people that are, with the economy, losing jobs, Lord, and homes, and I pray, Lord, that you would help these people find employment, find things to do. You have called us to be productive, and Lord, we ask for that opportunity, Lord, that we all can be productive. Father, we lift up Dan Bailey as he had surgery this week, that you would continue to heal the surgery that did go well, that you would continue to heal it, and Bob Kearns, Lord, as he had knee surgery as well, that you would continue to heal his knee. Lord, if there's anything else that we may not know, but you know needs to be met, Lord, we just ask that you would meet those needs. Lord, we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So we're getting close to the end of Matthew, and as before, we kind of wind back a little bit and get a running start into what we're working on that week. So last week we were in chapter 25, part of the Olivet Discourse, and it was the portion really where Jesus talks in parables. And these parables were of the 10 virgins, the parable of the bags of gold, and of course Jesus ultimately one day separating the sheep from the goats. Now, with these parables were used to support what Jesus taught in chapter 24, what he preached on, and really it was the questions that the disciples had was, when was the temple going to be destroyed? When would you come back, and what is that going to look like? And so he answers those questions in 24. In 25, he kind of supports his answers through parables. When someone tries to teach somebody something, they teach them a lesson in black and white. Sometimes it just doesn't go over well. It's not received well. And so you use analogies and allegories and stories, however you can, to try to convey and support the facts that you'd already taught. Pastors do it with sermons, and we did it by example from the ultimate pastor, which was Jesus Christ, and the parables that he uses. So, of course, we know the Olivet Discourse was in the Mount of Olives, and this happened just prior to the Passover and the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross with the crucifixion and his resurrection. So today we're picking up in chapter 26, and this is the plot. This is how Satan is trying to use people to come against Jesus and end his ministry and foil any plans he may have in redeeming humankind for God. This is the plot. In verse 1, chapter 26, it said, when Jesus had finished saying all these things, what things was he saying? just finished the Olivet Discourse, so he's coming right into this. So this is happening right after all of that. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, he said to his disciples, "As you know, the Passover is 2 days away, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priest and the elders of the people assembled in the palace of the high priest, whose name was Caiaphas. And they schemed to arrest Jesus secretly and kill him. But not during the festival, they said, or there may be a riot among the people. So there's a couple of reasons why as they're plotting, they don't want to do this during the festival. Several weeks ago, I think when we were, it was a Sunday service, we talked about what 1.5 million people would be in Jerusalem during the Passover. And Jerusalem is a very small town. Even though it's the capital in those days, big cities aren't like what we see big cities today. The Earth's population wasn't there yet. So you had 1.5 million people, which was astronomical, really, if you think about it in those days. Everyone throughout all the nation came to Jerusalem to worship during the Passover. So if they're going to do something that's wrong, they do not want to do it when all these people are around for them to be seen and caught doing what they're doing. So, and besides the fact it is wrong to do these things during a festival. So for those two reasons, they don't want this done during the festival. So they're plotting to kill him, but they're going to say, we're going to hold off and do this after the festival. Jesus gives us a timeline. It says, he just finished the Olivet Discourse, and he said that in 2 days he's going to be crucified. So we know when this happens during the week. And of course, it talks about the chief priests, the elders, and all of these high officials are all meeting with Caiaphas. And of course, Caiaphas is the high priest, and you have Ananias, which is a high priest. And usually the high priest, that was a lifetime appointment, but because the position was so political at this point in history that Ananias had quit serving as the high priest, and he had one of his sons, Caiaphas, become the high priest. And so we have these, this position that was supposed to be a position that the high priest would be the one directly in contact with God. He was the one through which the people would work out sin and just whatever information. And the Supreme Court judge, he held that very high political and religious position, but it became more political in this time in history than it had ever been. And so people were corrupt. They were bribing him. They were to get their way. Ananias actually set up the whole temple system where they would, bring their sacrifice to be sacrificed. You didn't go to the temple without a sacrifice. And when you go to the temple with the sacrifice, if you brought your own and it had any blemish, you couldn't use it. Therefore, you would have to buy one from them at triple the cost of what it would normally cost, because these were already priest-approved, pre-approved, stamped, animals to be sacrificed. Well, with these animals ready to be sacrificed and they're wanting you to buy their animals, they would reject just about anything you brought. So people just got to the point where they just wouldn't bring it. They would go there to buy it. Now, when they would go there to buy it, what would they have? They would have Roman coinage, or coinage that would have the image of a person on it. And of course, we know through the Mosaic Law, you couldn't have anything with an image on it. It would be considered worshiping an image, especially in the temple. So you couldn't bring those coins into the temple. And of course, we learned earlier when Jesus brought this up to the Pharisees when they were trying to trap him. When they tried to trap him with, who do we, or should we pay taxes to Caesar? And he says, well, give me a denarius. So one of these, Jewish priest or whatever pulled out a denarius. So he already pointed out the hypocrisy. They weren't supposed to have one of these coins in the temple, and one of these priests had one of these coins on him, and he said, whose image is on it? And he said, Caesar. He said, well, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. And so he kind of made a point on, we are image bearers of God. We're to give ourselves to God, give to Caesar, pay to Caesar his taxes. So he was able to answer the question, not upsetting or having a way for anyone to accuse Jesus, whether it be the people that didn't like Rome or the Romans that were there, or the Roman people who were in favor of Rome that were there. So Jesus kind of worked his way around that, and so in doing so, my point was that he had that coin in there. So anybody who came into the temple couldn't use their coinage to purchase these animals for sacrifice. So they would have to go to the money exchanger, where they had pre-approved temple coinage that didn't have any images that would be considered false idols. And so in that money exchange, they would lose more money in that exchange, kind of like our economy right now, with inflation. It's sort of the same way, same thing. So you would trade in your coin and get, or 10 coins to get one of the temple coins, just for an example. I don't know the exact exchange rate. So that was kind of the foundation of what was going on in the temple. You had the religious leaders meeting, and they are, one, getting ready for the Passover festival, and two, they're scheming to kill Jesus. Verse 6, it says, while Jesus was in Bethany in the home of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume, which she poured on his head and as he was reclining at the table. When the disciples saw this, they were indignant. Why this waste, they asked. This perfume could have been sold at a high price and the money given to the poor. Aware of this, Jesus said to them, why are you bothering this woman? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will have with you always, but you will not always have me. When she poured the perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Truly I tell you, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. So here, Matthew's gospel doesn't give us the detail that John's gospel. Of course, it's in Luke as well, but in John chapter 12, I'm going to flip over there real quick and just point out a few references here. All right, so here's some of the details. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet with her hair, and the house was filled with fragrance of the perfume. But one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, a keeper of the money bag, and he used to help himself to what was put in it. So I'm going to stop there. So here we have details to fill in what Matthew's gospel talked about here. And you have to remember, Matthew's gospel was written to establish Jesus as king. His target audience were the Jewish people, and he was pointing out, in details that didn't point directly to the kingship of Jesus Christ. Matthew would leave out, but we find those details in other gospels like John. Here we learn who these people were. You know, in Matthew it just says the disciples, and it really didn't give detail why they were there. Here they know that there was a dinner to honor Jesus. There was expensive perfume. We know that it's Mary that poured this on Jesus. We had more detail than just pouring it on his head, but on his feet, and she wiped his feet with her hair. Then we know that the disciples were indignant that this money was, or this perfume was wasted, about a year's worth of wages, and that the disciples objected. But John mentioned who this objection came from, and it was Judas Iscariot. Now, I don't think it was a mistake that Matthew wrote disciples, because I think they all were indignant. But I think Judas led that charge. Judas was the one who voiced this disdain for what just happened, because John points out that he was a thief and he kept the money back. I don't think at the time John knew this, but when the gospel was written later, John was able to look back and reflect through the Holy Spirit and give us those details that we didn't know it then, because none of the disciples, when Jesus said, one of you guys are going to betray me tonight, they all were like, surely not I, is it me? I mean, they were looking at themselves. None of them looked at anyone else at the table. They all looked at themselves like, is it me? Is it me? Of course, Judas actually says, surely not I, and of course, Jesus said, it is as you said. So he pretty much said at the table with everybody there, and nobody even picked up that Jesus pointed out that it was Judas, because everybody was so concerned about themselves. It wasn't them who was going to betray Jesus. So, John does a good job at kind of filling in some of these holes and giving us a little bit more detail of this account. Yeah. Mary Magdalene. So it was Mary. Her question was it Mary Magdalene who put the perfume? And it was. And Mary Magdalene was the prostitute. And it's, Jesus had made a point, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but his point before was who is more, and of course I'm paraphrasing, who's more gracious about having their sins forgiven? A horrible sinner, or one who thinks they're not that big of a sinner? So who's been forgiven much, they're the ones who are more. And because she understood the depravity of her sin, and that she was forgiven of this prostitution, that she was just overwhelmed with love and gratitude, and she was a disciple of Jesus. We look at the men disciples. There were women disciples too, and we know Mary and Martha, and there were other women as well. We see it at the resurrection. Different accounts give different names. We all know that there was Mary, but there was like 3 Marys that were at there, depending on which gospel you read. There were a lot of Marys back in those days. I don't know if they had last names. I don't think they had last names. So, right, Mary of where they were. Right. So, and I know, like my mother, she never had a middle name. Now we have so many people that pretty soon we're going to have 2 middle names. I don't know. I digress. All right, so now verse 14, chapter 26. It says, Then one of the 12, the one called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priest and asked, What are you willing to give me What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you? So they counted out for him 30 pieces of silver. From then on, Judas watched for an opportunity to hand him over. Now, they knew that they had to take Jesus at night, and with no street lights, no lights or anything like that, they would have to have somebody take them to Jesus. Jesus is not, it's not like he had an address where they could go. In those days, they pretty much, when they would come to these festivals, They slept anywhere they could find a place to lay down. They would, and most of it was outside of the city. And just like Jesus, he was out in the Garden of Gethsemane, which was probably owned by a wealthy person in town, but because of the dense population in the town, there was no way that you could have a garden inside of Jerusalem. It was just too many people. So Judas would have had, the religious leaders would have had to have somebody point Jesus out, take them to Jesus to be able to grab him. Now, I want to point out some things. I want to dig a little bit deeper here in this part, and kind of lay a foundation of what the Mosaic system was like and what they were supposed to do, how many priests there were. If in a town, if it was anywhere, there was at least 120 heads of households, they could establish a Sanhedrin. All right, so this would be their or council. This is where they would make decisions on crime and whatever need to happen, and it would be an odd number so that they would have a tiebreaker if need be. But in Jerusalem, that is where the great Sanhedrin was. That was where so if we look at and of course our form of government, all forms of government, good governments, all came back to this very design that God set up in Deuteronomy that we're getting ready to read. And so we have, like in our country, we have the federal court system, we have the Supreme Court, and so with the federal courts or the appellate courts, everything could rise to the point where if you live in Virginia, you had to go to, I don't know the number, I guess the second federal court or whatever. And so as far as America, it's all divided up in the geography and what court you would be in as far as the appellate court. If you didn't like that decision, then you can appeal it to the Supreme Court. So in Jerusalem, that Sanhedrin, that chief priest, would have been their Supreme Court. So wherever you lived at, whatever town, they had their own Sanhedrin. If they had 120 men there, if it was less than 120 men, they would set up a council of a smaller group, but they would make their own decisions in that area. If you weren't satisfied with that answer, you could appeal it to the Supreme Court, which would have been the court there, or the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. Now, so I want to go to Deuteronomy 16. Verses 18 through 20. And here, it's laid out what they're supposed to do with judges. Verse 18, chapter 16 of Judges. Appoint judges and officials for each of your tribes in every town the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall judge the people fairly. Do not pervert justice or show partiality. Do not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and twists the words of the innocent. Follow justice and justice alone, so that you may live and possess the land your God is giving you. We know in America we have the statue with Lady Liberty is blindfolded with the scales. All of this comes back to a biblical Mosaic law. We know, with this is pointed out how the judges are supposed to set up. Moses originally was the judge, and it became too much for him to handle. And so he had to appoint and make other judges underneath of him, and he only handled the big stuff that was, he let all these other people handle all the smaller things. And it's really the same type system that Jerusalem ended up, Israel and Judah end up having, with Jerusalem being the Supreme Court. So let's flip over a couple chapters here in verse 19. And here it talks about witnesses. Starting in verse 15 of chapter 19. It says, "One witness is not enough to convict anyone accused of any crime or offense they may have committed. A matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses." I'm going to stop there real quick. Now, these witnesses had to be male witnesses. They had to be adults. They couldn't be children. They had to have their full capabilities. They couldn't have any mental impairments or anything like that. They had to be, and they had to be men for the point that women weren't looked at the same way as men. But there's actually a deeper meaning behind that. When someone was found guilty that ended up needing to be punished with death, the witness would be the one who would throw the first stone, the witness. And it was done so for an accountability purpose. If that witness was lying, then the blood that he shed would be on him and all his offspring. And so it was a way of keeping people accountable. If a witness was found guilty of lying, that witness was punished with the same punishment that they were going to punish the person he was lying for or lying against. If somebody accused somebody of murder and they found out that he was lying, he would be murdered or stoned. And so so they had a lot of these things. They had a court system that was very swift. When they made a decision, and if it was a capital punishment, it was usually taken 3 days, and they would take care of that business right then. They wouldn't wait like our system does. It could be 10 years, somebody sitting on death row. If you were found guilty, 3 days. And that 3-day time period was a time period that the judges and the witnesses had a chance to, if there was something else, they gave the criminal an opportunity to defend themselves. They gave the criminal ample time for witnesses to come forward after they were found guilty. And so that's what that 3 days was. And during that 3 days, so it would have been that day, the next full day, and then the following day. That full day was when the judges were told they were to fast. They had to fast over the situation. They could not eat that day. They would go, and once they went through that process and nobody brought any evidence, and this man was found guilty and they were going to take him out to be executed, they would have somebody that would go out, the herald would go out in front. There would be somebody there with a flag. And as they marched this person slowly out, this herald would actually announce the person's name, their crime, and their punishment. And they would, if there was any witnesses, come forward swiftly, or this person is going, this person is going to get killed. So this processional would be very slow. There would be somebody on horseback at the rear, waiting at the back where the processional started in case somebody was back there. So you had that person in the front constantly looking back there, making sure there wasn't anybody to stop the whole process. And so they gave this criminal ample opportunity. That the justice system was set up in such a way that executing somebody was not something they wanted to do, because they knew that if they were to execute an innocent person, that blood would be upon them. That was why they made the witness be the person who would cast the first stone. And if you think about when Jesus was there with the woman caught in adultery, and what did he do? He went right. He always went back to God's word. He always went back to His word, right? He went back to His word, and he said, "Let those who don't have any sin cast the first stone." And because then whoever was the one who cast that first stone, that woman's blood would be upon them, and all their offspring would be guilty of that murder. And so it was something that was very, everyone took very serious, and it made it a point that nobody would accuse somebody falsely. because you knew that that innocent blood was going to be on your hands. Now, I wanted to lay that foundation because we're getting ready to go into what they're going to do to Jesus. All their criminal justice system was always, it had to be in the open for everyone to see. We, in our country, we do the same thing. We have our court proceedings. The public is, you can come in. Once in a while, they'll close to public because of security reasons, high profile cases they have to. But by and large, it's open. No one's tried at night. Everyone's done in the daylight. So a lot of what we see in our criminal system, our justice system, is something that is mirrored strictly from the Bible here. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that because I've started on that point and then I forgot. I left out a point. One of the reasons women weren't allowed to be witnesses to these things because women couldn't stomach being the first one to throw a stone at someone. And so that was another reason why women weren't allowed to be a witness against someone, because if they were a witness against someone in a crime that demanded capital punishment, they wouldn't be able to follow through with what they would be required to do. So they wouldn't use women for witnesses in those situations too. I'm glad you brought that up because that was the point I was going at, and I forgot my place. I'm glad you said that. Of course, in that time frame, women weren't looked at the same way as men. So it was, more than just that reason, but that was a big reason that a woman couldn't be used as a witness, because a woman wouldn't have the stomach to follow through with the punishment. So thank you for bringing that up. So now we have Jesus is going to, Judas agrees to betray him back here in Matthew. And we're going to pick up here with the Last Supper. Now we have to remember why they are having this Last Supper. This was, we call it the Last Supper, but this was the Passover. This is something that they were going to have. They have it every year, and this was the biggest event of the year, because throughout history, one of the biggest things that ever happened was God showing his might and glory from his people who were in captivity by the strongest man in the world at the time, Pharaoh, for over 400 years. And so all these plagues he sent, and this final plague was where the angel of death would pass over and take the firstborn son of every household. If the blood of the unblemished lamb that was a year old and a male and lived with them in their house for at least 4 days before they killed this lamb and ate this lamb, it was instructed on how they were to eat this lamb. They had to cook the whole thing. The innards had to be in them, the head attached, everything. They had to eat it all. They had to, this lamb, like I said, had to be a male of 1 year of age, had to be unblemished. And 4 days prior to this, the lamb had to live in the house that it would be ate at. Now, they didn't just sprinkle the blood of that lamb on the doorpost. They painted their doorpost with this blood. I mean, and if you think of it, if God said, hey, put the blood of the lamb over the doorpost and over the lintel, and the angel of death would pass over, I would make sure that every drop of that lamb's blood was on that doorpost. I don't want anybody saying, well, I didn't see it. Whoops, my bad if the angel flew over. I want to make sure that this thing, and they did. They took that blood and they painted the doorpost and the lintel across the top with the blood of the lamb. Of course, all of this is foreshadowing the death of Jesus Christ, the unblemished Lamb who lived among the people, who were crucified by his own people, and so all these things are just a mirror image of what was to come as far as the Passover, and that's why it was so important. So when God redeemed and saved his people from Pharaoh, and the whole ecosystem changed for this to happen. We know that there was a pillar of fire at night, there was a cloud that protected them during the day, that the seas were parted and then engulfed and killed the Pharaoh's army. So all these things, this is the biggest thing in history, that God did up until this point when Jesus would be the Passover lamb, when he would redeem all of mankind. So here on the Last Supper, it says, on the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover? He replied, go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I'm going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house. So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. When evening came, Jesus was reclining at the table with the 12. And while they were eating, he said, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. They were very sad and began to say to him one after the other, surely you don't mean me, Lord. Jesus replied, the one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me. The Son of Man will go just as it is written about him. But woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. Who would be better for him if he had not been born? Then Judas, the one who would betray him, said, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. Jesus answered, you have said so. I want to stop there. When the other disciples said, surely not I, Lord. When Judas says it, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. Judas spent all this time with Jesus and did not recognize him as Lord. He recognized him as a leader. He thought he would be the king that were going to save the people. He thought of him as the Messiah. He thought of him as a good teacher, rabbi meaning teacher, but he did not look at him as Lord. And we see that when he says this. And then Jesus points out, like I said, it says, you have said so. And the other disciples don't realize this until later. It was Judas that was the one to betray him. Verse 26, while they were eating, Jesus took the bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, take and eat, this is my body. Now, Jesus did this after Judas had just said, surely you don't mean me, Rabbi. The other Gospels give us more detail, and we know that once this exchange happened between Judas and Jesus, Jesus tells him to go and do what he is supposed to do. So Judas isn't even here for that Last Supper. And then, of course, that's when he takes the bread and breaks it. He said, this is my body, taken for you, broken for you. Take ye and eat. And then, in verse 27, it says, then he took the cup. When he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom. When they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So here, Jesus broke the bread and then the cup. And tradition has it that they would have 4 cups. The cup that Jesus drank from this night would have been the third cup, the cup of redemption. The fourth cup is the cup that we will drink with him again, as it says here, in his Father's kingdom. He says, I will not drink from the fruit of the vine from now on until the day comes when I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. So that's the fourth cup, and when we do our Seder meal and to try to learn some of these things, that fourth cup we do not drink either. So Jesus is the Passover lamb, and he is explaining it, and he's telling them and telling all of us from now on to do this in remembrance of him, to take communion. So when they would celebrate the Passover once a year, every time we celebrate the Last Supper, the communion, the Holy Communion, it is like what should be the biggest event of the year. Even if we do it every week, it still is the biggest event of the year, even if it is more than once. It's extremely important. Jesus predicts Peter's denial. So, we have two people here that are similar, and that is Judas and Peter, and they both betrayed Jesus. The difference is Peter is redeemed. Judas is not. Not that he couldn't have been redeemed, but he went and killed himself before he could be redeemed. And Peter is different. Peter sees Jesus after he denied him, and he had remorse. Judas had remorse, but Judas did not ask for forgiveness. Judas did not repent and turn away from what he had done. He tried to make things right. He went and took the coins and back to the priests. They wouldn't accept the coins, so they took the coins and bought a plot of land where they would later bury him. So the difference between the two men was one would have been redeemed and the other was not redeemed. Now Jesus predicts Peter's denial. Verse 31 says, "Then Jesus told them, 'This very night you will fall away on account of me, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will scatter. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee.' Peter replied, 'Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will.' 'Truly I tell you,' Jesus answered, 'this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter declared, 'Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you.' And all the other disciples said the same." So, it's a lot easier, talking a big talk when you're not faced with death. They're saying they'll go to the cross with Jesus, but we know that they don't. We know that they all scatter, just as Jesus said, that it was prophesied about in Zechariah 13, that I will strike the shepherd and the sheep of the flock will scatter. Now they're at Gethsemane. Verse 36, it says, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, 'Sit here while I go over there and pray.' He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him," that's James and John, "and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, 'My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me.' Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will.' Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. 'Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?' He asked Peter. 'Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.' He went away a second time and prayed, 'My Father, if it is If it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done." When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to his disciples and said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." So Jesus is in the garden. He brings his disciples, he brings his close disciples further in with him. That is Peter, James, and John. Tells them to sit and wait. We know that it was, an hour. He comes back, they're asleep. And he's grieved over them asleep. Why can't you stay awake? You've only got me for a few more hours. And he keeps telling them this, but they just, one, it's human. We see it with ourselves. We struggle with our prayer lives and our time with the Lord. We want to do more than we do. Even if we do a lot, we want to do more, and it seems like we never do as much as we want to do as far as spending time with the Lord. And here, the disciples are no different. He says, pray with them, stay watchful. They can't stay awake an hour. And of course, Jesus would have went off to pray many times, and I'm sure this to them was just like any other time. He would have went off and prayed, and they just kicked back against a tree and dozed off. But Jesus comes back a second and a third time, telling them to wake up. You don't have me much longer. Jesus here is also asking the Father if there is another way. If there's another way, he knows what he's in store for. He knows crucifixion. He knows the punishment. He knows the sin burden that is about to be laid upon him. Something that, as humans who have sinned, we don't know anything but sin. We know what sin is like. We know our depressions, our anxieties, our ups and downs. We know and we feel it. Jesus, he lived a life without sin. He never carried that weight. But he's going to carry that weight for us. And he's telling his disciples that, be watchful. He's praying to God, if there's another way, let's figure this out now because my time is coming up, but not my will, your will be done. And finally, he says, it's done. He knows that it's his hour. He tells them all to get up because he knows Judas is coming to point him out. And that's where we're at now. Verse 47, it says, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived with him, a large crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one I kiss is the man, arrest him. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. Jesus replied, "Do what you have came for, friend." Now that word friend is not the same friend as he would have talked to about his disciples. Friend would have been a more generic term, as in if you saw somebody on the street and said, exchange pleasantry and says, "Hey, how are you doing, my friend?" That kind of thing. It wouldn't have been someone who he would have been closely intimate with, a close friend at that point. And that would have been in the Greek word for friend there. Then it says, then the men stepped forward and seized Jesus and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword, drew it out, struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Now, Matthew doesn't point this out, but it was Peter who pulled his sword and cut the ear off of one of the guards. Jesus said, verse 52, "Put your sword back in its place." Jesus said to him, "For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" In that hour, Jesus said to the crowd, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I sat in the temple courts teaching. You did not arrest me. But this has all taken place that the writings of the prophets might be fulfilled." Then all the disciples deserted him and fled. Of course, the disciples fled because he said they would strike the shepherd and the sheep would scatter. This is where the sheep scatter, his disciples. Jesus is pointing out to Peter, put your sword away. If you're going to live by the sword, you're going to die by the sword. If I didn't want this to happen, if I wasn't in total control, my Father would send down 12 legions of angels. Well, so you brought up the fact that Peter had a sword, and we never see in any pictures or any writings that they're carrying weapons with them. I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that everybody in those days would have had sidearms, and their sidearms were swords. Because you got to think, when they go town to town, there were always bandits. That's why they never went alone. They went in groups to where they had protection, and the men would have carried swords to protect themselves from these bandits. So I think it would have been probably a common place for everyone to have some type of weapon. Of course, people nowadays in our country, they don't want to hear that, but they would have had a way, I believe, to defend themselves. And I'll look into that further, but I think I'm right with that one too. So. Yeah, there were no police. I mean, they really had to care for themselves. Jesus is trying to still establish that he is completely in control. He is in control. They're there to take him away, and he's pointing out the obvious. He goes, "Why are you out here with clubs and swords? And you have all these people, here I am. I'm turning myself in. I'm not putting up a fight. Why you need all these people?" And he points out that if, I didn't want you to do this, you wouldn't do it. A legion of angels, one angel could take care of all these men. But he said 12 legions of angels, and I'm thinking a legion's like 1,000. So 12,000 angels he had at his disposal if he needed them. He didn't need them because he was doing exactly what he was supposed to do. And he wasn't, going to allow his disciples. He told Peter before, "Get behind me, Satan." He wasn't going to let anybody get in his way in what his mission was. And his mission was to redeem mankind through the shedding of innocent blood, which was his own. So Jesus is completely in control. Jesus never goes around saying, "I'm the Messiah, I'm the King, I'm God," shouting it from the rooftop trying to convince people. Many times when he would do things, he would tell people, "Don't go and tell people." Jesus was so secure in his person, in his demeanor, the way he did everything. Everything was on a timetable that God, the Father, had set up for him to do. And he knew this timetable, and he was just doing step by step. He wasn't going to let anybody, any Satan, any demon get in his way. And he was extremely wise. Everything he said had purpose and meaning behind it. He wanted to point out, and he said these things because he knew that one day his disciples would write these things. And so he wanted to make sure that he said something that would be profound. And what was profound here was he was pointing out there were all these people to take him away, And they could have had one person say, come with me, and he would have went, because that was his mission. But he wanted to point out that he was an innocent lamb set to be slaughtered, and that all those men were there to take him away. Well, so the question is, why is that? Why is it that Jesus sometimes said, "Don't go and tell people," and other times he would go and tell people? We look at his 3-year ministry. Early on in the ministry, he was constantly telling people, "Don't go and tell anybody," because we know that he actually mentions that if they knew, they would try to make him king right then, and it wasn't his time. He had to play out his ministry over these 3 years. He had to disciple these men. He had to perform miracles. He had to meet all the prophetic things to happen. He had to be crucified on the Passover. So all these things, it was a time schedule thing. So the Samaritan woman at the well, he actually never told her to go back and tell everybody. You know, what he did was when a woman at the well, he pointed out to her that, you don't have your husband. You've had 5 husbands, and the one you're with now isn't your husband. And so, she goes back and tells the men. They all come out, and of course, and Jesus ends up going down to them, and lots of Samaritans were saved. So, really and we also know that when he would tell somebody not to go tell them, they went out and told anyway. And some of the time, the miracles people, had happened to them, they didn't even know who he was. We learned that when the Pharisees questioned, the young man that he healed, who was this? And he's like, I don't know who he was. But then later he finds out who it was. He goes back to the Pharisees and says, yeah, it's Jesus. He's the one that healed me. And that was after Jesus said not to go and tell anybody. But a lot of this is his timetable. If he would have, as things escalate, if you read through chronologically his ministry, as it got further and further, closer and closer to when this Passover that he would be sacrificed, that it started with don't tell anybody. To some people were, all right, you can kind of let people know. And then later on, it was in your face. He was in the Pharisees' face. He was flipping tables over. I mean, he was making a point at that time. And it didn't matter, because he knew that he had to force these people's hands into doing what God's will was to be done. So he didn't care anymore that these people know. And it was all God's timetable, really. I think that was a lot of it. I think it also shows mankind that even after somebody heals you and says, don't go tell anybody, they go out and do it anyway. It shows our humanity. It reveals a lot there. He had the time when there was I think it was the 10 blind men that he healed, and one of them come back and thank him, and none of the rest do. So he's constantly making a point of our sinful humankind, no matter what kind of miracles, and that's where we've all heard people say, if God did fill in the blank, then I would believe. If God did, he made a point, and we read it in the Gospels, that he did everything. He did these miracles, and people still didn't believe. He turned water into wine. He healed the lame, healed the deaf, the blind. People could walk. He raised people from the dead. He foretold things. So he was a prophet. He taught from God's word, And this was a person who was never in a synagogue to be trained, but he knew God's word better than they did. So, he covered it all, but yet people still don't believe. So really it comes down to the human heart. We're all sinners. We've all made mistakes, but it comes down to whether or not we believe. He said just the faith of a mustard seed. If you believe that little bit, that you can move that mountain. You can move mountains. Tell the mountain to be thrown into the sea, and it would throw himself into the sea. And so with that little bit of faith that we believe that Jesus Christ, was the sacrificial lamb that redeems all mankind through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, and we put our faith in him, we will be saved. And he fills in the blanks. Really, and it's even foretold, blessed are those who haven't seen yet still believed. And that when he talks about a mustard seed of faith, we've never seen Jesus Christ, and yet we, many people show up in churches every week. So there is that faith, and there is, but the problem is people take their faith and they don't take it any further. They believe enough that they want to kind of hedge their losses. They're like, well, I do believe there's a God, and I want to make sure that, and I know there's a heaven, and I know there's a hell, and I don't want to go to hell, and I want to be in heaven, so I'm going to go to church. And so they are acting on their faith. The problem is they stop there, and they don't let their faith grow, and they don't live it out throughout their week. It's just they do the minimum, and God does not want us to do the minimum. We learn that with the parable of the talents. He says, I give 5 talents to one, I give 2 to another, I give 1 to another. The one who had 1 talent, he went and buried it. He didn't do anything with it. If God gave us these talents, he wants us to go out and multiply ourselves. He wants to go out and disciple men, tell people about him, and teach them about him, and bring somebody else along. And if we're not doing that, then he's saying that we are going to be cut off. The very parable before that, he talks about the 10 bridesmaids. 5 are shrewd, are waiting around. They've got their oil ready to go for the wedding festival that would take place at midnight. And then you had 5 bridesmaids that weren't ready. And when they heard that the bridegroom was coming, they all went out in the street. The 5 without the oil realized they didn't have oil. They asked to borrow some, and they said, well, we're not going to loan you our oil because we might run out. Go buy your own. They go off to buy their own. The bridegroom comes back, takes the 5, and leaves, and the other 5 are left. And that bride that he's talking about is the church. All the people that say, I know Jesus Christ, that come to church every week, but that's as far as they go. They don't want to do anything else for anybody else. They don't want to do anything else for God. They want to kind of hedge their losses and say, well, I want to make sure I get to heaven. I'm going to show up on Sunday. And that's not good enough. And he could have easily, 10 was the number of bridesmaids they would use in a wedding traditionally. So they used that number. And when he makes a point, he could have said 1 of them didn't have their oil. Or he could have said 9 of them. But he didn't. He said 5 of them. And why did he say 5? And I believe that his point was that, not that it was going to be 50% of the people in churches are not going to be in heaven. He's saying a large amount of people are going to be excluded from heaven, that are going to be thrown out with the weeds and burn up, talking about hell, and that it's going to be a large portion of the church. And it's going to be a large portion because these people are coming and they're there for fire insurance, and that's it. That's all they're there for. They want to escape hell. And now, God's grace does do that. We know that with the thief on the cross. He didn't have an opportunity to, it's almost like he was, if Jesus probably would have went further with that talent story, 5, 2, 1, the thief on the cross would have been 0. He didn't have anything to give because he was going to die in a couple hours. But he was still redeemed because he looked at Christ for salvation. He knew that he was a sinner. He had a change of heart. If you come to church every week and you do nothing for Christ and you don't use any of your abilities or skill for Christ, you haven't had a change of heart. There's no change of heart there. You're there for fire insurance. You want to hedge your losses. You want to make sure that you've done some bad things, you've done some good things in your life, but I just don't want to go to hell and I'm going to be at church on Sunday. Well, then you're not going to be redeemed. That is not what Christ came for. He came to save the lost, and if you're there to hedge your losses and to avoid hell, you're not there for the right reason. He came there for the lost. You are lost, because you think you're going to be saved, but that's not what Christ came for. He came to save people who wanted to turn away from sin and reject sin. Questions, comments? Run over a little.